आप अपना स्थान ग्रहण कर लें। कुछ लोग मुझे खड़े नजर आ रहे हैं तो बैठ जाएं। अपना सेल फोन बंद कर दें या उसका मुंह मरोड़ दें, जो भी आप कर सकते हैं और आपको उचित लगे। आज हमारा दूसरा दिन है और आज सबसे व्यस्त दिन है। तो जो आप सब हैं यहाँ, उनको बहुत धीरज से काम लेना होगा। आपस में बातचीत करने का स्वाभाविक उत्साह होता है, उस उत्साह का भी गला मरोड़ दीजिए, क्योंकि अभी आपको दूसरों को सुनना है। जो कवि नहीं आ पाए उनसे हमने आग्रह किया कि वो अपने कविता पाठ का की एक रिकॉर्डिंग हमको भेज दें, जो हम यहाँ प्रस्तुत करेंगे, और उसके बाद उनके अनुवाद। तो जो दो कवि हैं इस लंच के पहले, वो हैं मिस्र से याह्या लाबाबीदी और सूडान से के एल्टिने हैं ये। तो इनकी आवाज़ आप सुनेंगे, इनको देखेंगे भी, और इनके अनुवाद फिर गजाला आपको बताएंगे कौन पढ़ेगा, क्या करेंगे। ये सत्र चलेगा, उम्मीद है 1:15 बजे तक। इन दो के बाद एक हमने we have organized a discussion participating, some of the participating poets, Daniel Libara, Ausra, Kaziliunaite, Katerina Kalitko, and Samira Negrush. And from Indian side, our life trustee, Ashok Vajpeyi, will conduct it. Later afternoon, and that's an important, when we are going to present to the poets 4 gifts. A stole with a Raza painting, a scarf with a Raza painting, a set of reproductions of these paintings, and the book, the holy book of this festival, which is called SANSAAR, as simple as that. You know, we are the only ones who consider the world holy. We don't consider books as holy, and we don't consider God or whatever they are holy. We consider poetry as holy. So you will have that, and then of course the proceedings will go on. We'll of course give you lunch, and we are hoping that some more will join us before lunch, as is the custom here. You know, in Delhi, when you are doing these kinds of events, and we do too many, Delhi is sick of us, quite frankly, because we do one event almost every week. Although they relate to different areas like music or visual arts or ideas or philosophy or things of that kind. So we were different minded, we have no problem. But the fact remains that Delhi is not a particularly poetry-loving city, and which is a great betrayal of its own history. Delhi was, in many ways, some of the greatest poets of Indian tradition were born, if not born, because Raja was not born here, but emerged here as a great poet. So was Mir, so like many others, Agay, etc. But Delhi as a city, as an urban populace, isn't a poetry-loving city. So it's a bit of audacity on our part to do things in poetry here. But we continue to believe that poetry can civilize you, that poetry can humanize you, poetry can possibly make you more sensitive, poetry can make you listen a little more, poetry can make you feel a little more, and poetry can make you see the world around you a little more carefully and attentively. So we continue this project anyway, and this festival is a very important project and a part of that project. So now over to Kozala. I take my seat.
Shukriya, Ashok ji. Namaskar, good morning. I welcome you to the second day of SANSAAR, where poetry is home and language is country. A warm welcome to all our participating poets from abroad and from India. They say when a language dies, a whole way of seeing the world vanishes. When our esteemed poets speak in their native tongues, be it Lithuanian, Arabic or Slovenian, they aren't just sharing words. They are bringing their entire landscape, their history, politics, and their ancestors onto the stage. As we translate those into Hindi and English, we aren't just changing words, we are building bridges between hearts and humanity. Yesterday, our sessions of poetry were interesting, intense and deep and very moving. और मैं क्रेडिट देना चाहूँगी हमारी ऑडियंस को भी, जो कि इतनी हसास है कि जिसने बहुत ही खामोशी और धैर्य के साथ इन सब कविताओं को सुना और बहुत ही गहराई से महसूस किया. और जैसा कि अशोक जी ने कहा, हमें आज भी आपसे वही उम्मीद है. So now we begin today's proceedings with the fourth session of poetry of this festival. It is titled A Love Letter to Gaza, the Indestructible in Us. The poet is Yahya Lavabidi. Yahya Lavabidi is the author of 12 books of poetry and prose, including Palestine Whale, which was published by the Raja Press in 2024, and What Remains to Be Said, this was published in 2025. His work has been translated into more than a dozen languages. His writing has been featured in World Literature Today, The New Arab, and Salma Gundi. Lavabidi has served as a judge for the PEN America Literary Awards and as a juror for the Neustadt International Prize for Literature. As Ashok ji just pointed out, that he has not been able to come for the festival, unfortunately, so we will have his recording, him reciting his poetry. लेकिन हमारी जो इन कविताओं को जिन्होंने अनुवाद किया है हिंदी में, वो हैं गिरधर राठी जी, जो हमारे साथ मौजूद हैं, तो वो हिंदी में उनकी कविताओं को पढ़ेंगे. मैं आमंत्रित करूंगी गिरधर राठी जी से कि वो आकर मंच पर अपना स्थान ग्रहण करें. राठी जी. राठी जी हिंदी कवि हैं और हिंदी अंग्रेजी अनुवादक, आलोचक, पत्रकार और संपादक हैं. आए. So now I think we could have the recording.
Thank you, Raza Foundation, for inviting me to participate in the SANSAAR International Poetry Festival, and for trusting in the power of poetry to heal and transform. I will be reading from my book, Palestine Whale, published by the Raja Press, which is dedicated to the memory of my beloved grandmother, Rabiha Dajani, forced to flee flee her ancestral home in Palestine over 80 years ago at gunpoint, and who went on to become a remarkable educator, an activist, and a social worker. So again, I will be reading from Palestine Whale. Hope. Hope's not quite as it seems. It's slimmer than you'd think, and less sturdy on its feet. Sometimes it's out of breath, can hardly see ahead, and cries itself to sleep. It may not tell you all this, or the times it cheated death, but if you knew it, you'd know how hope can keep a secret. The next poem is titled, What to Bring to a War Protest. Bring a candle burning in your eyes to lead the way. Bring a bird nestled in your heart to set others free. Bring a shroud large enough to bury the dead past. Bring a flag spotless and white to surrender pain. This next poem is actually inspired by a friend of mine in Gaza, a young poet who's been through unspeakable things, and in the last couple of years we've kept in touch. Why care about Gaza? Because you didn't have to run out to hunt for a spare tent in the middle of the night. Chest constricted and frantic. Lucky you and your family were not obliterated by the raining bombs, demolishing your home, snatching your childhood memories, replacing them with the unholy stench of burning human flesh. Here is a poem titled, Who is Innocent? If one were hard of heart, they might ask, is any Israeli innocent? In a state where military is compulsory for all, are there any citizens? Is Israel really a democracy, or just another theocracy, blinded by a too literal faith? How can any freedom be built upon another's captivity? The jailer is never free. But by the same harsh logic, one must condemn every Palestinian for the stone in their hand or heart. Who is innocent since Cain took his brother Abel's life? Whoever is able to live better. In Hebrew, Cain means possessor, while Abel means empty. What does that mean today? If we have no peace, Mother Teresa reminds us, it is because we have forgotten we belong to one another. And this next poem is titled, What Tragedy Teaches Us. Our friends fall into different camps. Those who feel our pain as their own, without hesitation or calculation, will rush to our side, casting their lot with ours, seeking to hear and heal. Others, tested by fire or tempted by the world, we must try to forgive, whose tongues are tied or hands are bound by an unspeakable doubt or allegiance to another pain. At least they wish us no harm. And if they do not know us or themselves well enough. Forgiveness only matters, Derrida argued, if we forgive the unforgivable. If you and I cannot remain friends because we do not see eye to eye, how can we call for peace in our world? And then this is a sort of an imaginary scene of how things might have turned out recently. It's titled Alternative Scenario. After the horrors of October 7th, the good people of Palestine rushed to the side of stricken Israelis, tending to the wounded, mourning the dead, comforting survivors. They kept vigil, praying and weeping, delivering truckloads of flowers, serving trays by day of warm meats and sweets. Palestinian families flooded the streets en masse, protesting, not in our names, demanding the return of the hostages, recognizing the great need. They gifted what they too longed for: mercy, solace, solidarity. Helpless, Hamas eventually surrendered. The Israeli government in turn relented, and walls in hearts crumbled, then tumbled. One can dream. This dream is followed by its antithesis, which is unfortunately our reality, titled Waking Nightmares. How is it that life carries on as they cry for us from under the rubble, while doctors amputate limbs without anesthesia? How did we staunch the wounds of our own throbbing hearts? The watermelons are rotten, cut open and bone dry from bleeding in the streets. Watered tears, I shudder to imagine the future of these sad seeds. What terrible fruit will grow? And here is an open letter to Israel, written actually well before October, the dreadful October. This is titled An Open Letter to Israel, and it opens with a quote from Nietzsche: "He who fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. Tell me, what steel entered your heart? What fear made you rabid? What hate drove out pity? How could you forget that how we fight a battle determines who we become? When did you grow reckless with the state of your soul? We are responsible for our enemy. Compassion is to consider the role that we play in their creation. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? Strange how one hate enables another, how they're like unconscious allies, darkly united in blocking out the light. Yes, we can lend ideas our breath, but ideals, peace, justice, freedom, require our entire lives. And all who are tormented by such ideals must learn to make an ally of humility. Truth and conscience can be like large, bothersome flies. Brush them away, and they return, buzzing louder. Tens of thousands slaughtered, half of whom are children? No. These are unbearable casualties to ignore, to speak nothing of the intangible casualties. The damage done to our collective psyche, trust, and sleep. No more nightmares, please. Give us back our dreams. We can still begin again, and must. Wisdom is a return to innocence. It's a very short poem written in the last couple of years, which has been read in festivals internationally by poets throughout the world, which has been very reassuring to know that there are people of conscience everywhere who do not represent their corrupt governments. This is called Say Something. If you're uncomfortable saying genocide, say mass murder, say boneyard, say unmarked graves, say pity the children, Say humanity under the rubble. Say, Lord, forgive us the enormity of our sins. At least say, not in my name. I'm waiting to hear from you. Please, say something. And this is kind of a companion piece that speaks for itself about the overwhelming toll of all of this. During a genocide, you will find that during a genocide, most words lose their meaning. Some sound empty and others strange. Apart from unceasing prayer, eloquence takes the form of tears or kindness and solidarity. Even a quiet moan or sighing is preferable to false words, or worse, a loud and wounding silence. And I'm hoping as much as possible to end on a somewhat brighter note. And so I'm reminding myself of the role of poetry and activists and artists as well throughout the world. The light keepers. Hope is a lighthouse, or at least a lamppost. Someone must keep vigil to illumine the possibility. In the dark, a poet will climb narrow, unsteady stairs to gaze past crashing waves and sing to us new horizons. Others, less far-sighted, might be deceived by the encroaching night, mistake the black for lasting. But not those entrusted with trimming wicks. Their tasks are more pressing, winding clockworks, replenishing oil. There is no time for despair when tending to the light. Blasphemous praise. The poet is a prophet, a fisher of souls, a human sacrifice sent to save you, an undoer of knots, your sworn advocate, a lifelong listener, a reminder when you forget, your unknown friend, a helper in affliction, and with your consent, a trusted healer. And finally, I think this last poem is fitting to express our ultimate helplessness, and especially as I am reading this during Ramadan, and also Lent for those who are observing. The title of the poem is Summary. The hands were made to clasp, the knees designed to bend, the body created to pray. What else is there to say? The mouth was shaped to gasp, the eyes drawn to attend, the soul commanded to obey. What else is there to say? The memory was wired to lapse, the heart fashioned to rend, the will inclined to betray. What else is there to say? Thank you very much for your attention, and of course we continue to do this quiet, secret work in opening hearts and minds and softening people who have hardened against our shared humanity and our higher allegiances to one another. Thank you again.
बेदी ने अपनी एक कविताएं जिस किताब से सुनाई हैं उसका नाम फिलिस्टाइन वेल है। फिलिस्तीन विलाप कह सकते हैं, जैसे नल दमयंती विलाप है या भारत विलाप है, तो ये फिलिस्तीन विलाप से चुनी हुई कविताएं हैं। पहली है सोचा था जितना, उससे ज्यादा ही दुबली है। पैरों पर भी बहुत सधी हुई नहीं है, कभी कभी इसकी सांस फूल जाती है, देख नहीं पाती क्या है आगे आगे, और टुक रोते रोते सो रहती है। खुद शायद ना ही बतलाए वो ये सब, या कि मौत को कितनी बार दिया है चकमा। लेकिन यदि उसे जान पाओ तो जानोगे किस तरह उम्मीद छिपा रखती है गुप्त भेद। What to bring to a war protest, क्या क्या ले जाना है जंग के खिलाफ। लाना कंदील अपनी आंखों में जगमग रास्ता दिखाने को, लाना परिंदा दिल में बसाया हुआ करने को सबको आजाद, लाना बड़ा सा कफन जिसमें कर सको दफन मरे हुए माजी को, लाना परचम सफेद करने ऐलान दर्द की शिकस्त का। Why care? काहे परवाह करे, क्योंकि तुझे ऐन आधी रात खाली किसी तंबू के वास्ते नहीं करनी पड़ी भागदौड़। ऐंठते सीने और बदहवास मन से किस्मत वाला तू और तेरा परिवार नहीं किया गया नेस्तनाबूद बरसती बमबारी से। करता आशियाना तबाह, छीनता तुझसे तेरे बचपन की यादें, उनकी जगह साँटता नापाक बदबू जलते इंसानी गोश्त की। Who is innocent? कौन है बेगुनाह? दिल कठैठ हो तो पूछेगा कोई भी, है कोई इजरायली बेगुनाह? मुल्क में जहां हो लाजिम सभी का फौजी होना, है क्या वहां कोई नागरिक? क्या इजराइल वाकई जमहूरी है या फकत एक और दीनी हुकूमत, सुंधियाई जो अपने किताबी मजहब से गैरों को कैद कर कैसे खड़ी होगी आजादी? जेलर नहीं होता हरगिज आजाद, मगर उसी कड़वी दलील से निंदा करनी होगी हर फिलिस्तीनी की, हो जिसके हाथ या हृदय में पाषाण। कौन रहा बेगुनाह अब जब से केन ने जान ली भाई एबेल की, जो हो समर्थ वही जी सकता है बेहतर। हिब्रू में केन के मानी है मालदार, एबेल का मतलब है कि कंगाल है। क्या है अहमियत आज अब उसकी? मदर टेरेसा हमें याद दिलाती हैं, अगर हमारे पास अमन चैन नहीं रहा तो इसलिए कि हम भूल ही चुके हैं कि हम सब जुड़े हैं एक दूसरे के संग। What tragedy teaches us, त्रासदी हमें जो सिखाती। हमारे दोस्त अहबाब अलग अलग खानों में बटे हैं, वे जो महसूस करते हैं हमारा दर्द उनका अपना ही दर्द है। बिना हिचक बिना गुंताड़े के वे दौड़े आएंगे हमारे करीब दर्द की दवा करने, छोड़कर मुकद्दर हमारे मुकद्दर पर। दूसरे जो जले हैं आग में या ललचा गए दुनियादारी से, उन्हें माफ करने की कोशिश हम करें। उनकी जुबानों पर लगी है लगाम या हाथ हैं उनके बंधे हुए, शायद किसी अकथनीय शुबहे से या किसी और दर्द की वफादारी से। वे कम अज कम बुरा नहीं चाहते हमारा, या चाहते हो तो भी जानते नहीं हमको या खुद अपने को। भली तरह देरीदा देता है तर्क, तभी कुछ अहमियत होती है माफी की जब हम कर दें माफ उसे जो ना हो माफी के लायक। तुम और मैं अगर दोस्त नहीं रह सकते क्योंकि हम मिला नहीं पाते आंख से आंख, तब किस्मों करें हम शांति का आह्वान हमारी दुनिया में। वैकल्पिक परिदृश्य, ऑल्टरनेटिव सिनेरियो। 7 अक्टूबर की विभीषिका के बाद फिलिस्तीन के सारे अच्छे इंसान दौड़ पड़े आहत इजरायली जनों के पास, घायल की करते शुश्रूषा, मृतकों का करते विलाप, बचे हुओं का बधाते ढाढ़स। जागे रात रात दुआ करते ससकते, ट्रक भर भर पहुंचाते फूल, दिन भर परोसते व्यंजन मिष्ठान। फिलिस्तीनी कुर्बों से भर उठी सड़कें, संवेद करते विरोध, नहीं कतई नहीं, मांगते कि लौटा दो बंधक सारे सारे। जानते जरूरत को, उनको भी तलब नहीं, जानते जरूरत को, उनको भी तलब यही, देते उपहार दया करुणा एकात्मता, और जग साक्षी हो कभी न भुला पाता। अवश्य हमारा कर चुका होता समर्पण। झुक गई होती इजराइल सरकार भी, हृदय में दीवारें दरकती ढह जाती। तो एक सुंदर सा सपना था, और अब उसके बरक्स चलते चलते जाते स्वप्न, वेकिंग नाइटमेयर्स। यह कैसे होता है कि जिंदगी बदस्तूर जारी रही आती है, जबकि वे पुकार रहे होते हैं हमें मलबे के नीचे से। सुन्न किए बिना ही जब डॉक्टर करते हैं अंगच्छेद, कैसे दवा पाते हैं जख्म हम अपने ही धड़कते दिलों का। चिरे कटे और हड्डी जैसे सूखे तरबूज सड़ने लगे हैं, गली गली अपना खून बिखरा कर। अश्रु जल सिंचे इन दुखियारी बीजों का क्या है भविष्य, यह सोच सिहर जाता हूँ। फल होंगे कैसे तो भयास्पद। ओपन लेटर टू इजराइल, इजराइल के नाम खुली चिट्ठी। नीचे का उदाहरण है इसमें शुरू में। दानवों से लड़ने वाला यह ध्यान रखे कि इस प्रक्रिया में वह खुद दानव न हो जाए। बता कैसा वज्रा बसा तेरे हृदय में, किस भय ने किया तुझे बावला, कैसे घृणा ने किया करुणा को निष्कासित। कैसे तू भूल गया हम जैसे लड़ते हैं जंग वैसे हो जाते हैं। अपनी ही आत्मा के साथ तू कब से करने लगा ऐसी खिलवाड़। अपने शत्रु की खातिर हम उत्तरदायी हैं, उनको बनाने में हमारी जो भूमिका उस पर करें विचार, यही तो करना है। छुपाओगे हमको तो खून नहीं निकलेगा, दोगे जहर तो हम मरेंगे नहीं क्या। अगर हमसे बुरा करो बदला न लेंगे हम। अजब है कि एक घृणा दूसरी बढ़ाती है, अनजाने ही कैसी सखियां वे बनी हैं। रोशनी को रोकने को गुपचुप साठ गांठ किए। बेशक विचार का तो उच्चार काफी है, लेकिन आदर्शों को, शांति न्याय मुक्ति को चाहिए हमारा जीवन संपूर्ण। और वे जो व्याकुल हैं ऐसे आदर्शों से, उन्हें नम्रता को अपना सखा बनाना होगा। सत्य और हाँ, अंतरात्मा भिनकती हुई बड़ी मक्खियों की तरह तंग कर सकती है, उड़ा तो फिर लौट आती है भन भन। दसियों हजार कर दिए कत्ल, उनमें आधे से छोटे बच्चे ही थे। बुलाई नहीं जा सकती असहनीय हत्याएं। निराकार चीजों की हत्याएं अलहदा हैं, निराकार चीजों की हत्याएं अलहदा हैं। हुई क्षत विक्षत हमारी जाति आत्मा, विश्वास और नींद। बस करो। सुनने की बात जोता हूं मैं, प्लीज कुछ कहो। ड्यूरिंग ए जेनोसाइड, जाति संहार के दरमियान तुम पाओगे कि जाति संहार के दरमियान अधिकतर शब्द अपने अर्थ खो देते हैं। तुम पाओगे कि जाति संहार के दरमियान अधिकतर शब्द अपने अर्थ खो देते हैं, कुछ लगने लगते हैं खोखले और कुछ अजीब से। अनवरत प्रार्थना के अलावा वक्तृता या तो आंसू बन जाती है या फिर दयालुता और एकात्मता। धीमी सी सिसकी या आह बेहतर होती है झूठे शब्दों से, या उनसे भी खराब धमकदार कटखनी चुप्पी से। रोशनी के रखवाले, द लाइट कीपर्स। उम्मीद एक लाइट हाउस है या कम से कम एक लैंप पोस्ट। इस संभावना को रोशन रखने के लिए चाहिए कि कोई करता रहे हर जगह। अंधेरे में एक कवि चढ़ेगा सकरी डगमगाती वे सीढ़ियां, लहराती लहरों के पार टकटकी लगाने को और हमारे लिए नए क्षितिज गाने को। कम नजर दूसरे शायद भरम जाएं, उमड़ती चली आती आधी रात में रात से मानकर कि अंधियारी रहेगी, पर नहीं भरमेंगे वे जिनको लैंप की बत्तियां सजाना है। उनकी जिम्मेदारी और भी सख्त है। कहीं चाबी देना, खोलने वाला तुम्हारा एक वफादार भी, जिंदगी सुनने वाला, भूलो तो याद दिलाने वाला, तुम्हारा अनजाना दोस्त, दुख में सहारा, और दे इजाजत तो कहूं तुम्हारा विश्वस्त कविराज। हाथ बनाए गए थामने को, घुटने गढ़े गए झुकने को, तन बदन रचा दुआ के वास्ते, और क्या बचा है अब कहने को। मुंह ढाला गया ताकि हैरानी जतलाए, आंखें उकेरी गई थीं गौर करने को, रूह को हिदायत थी हुक्म बजाती जाए, और क्या बचा है अब कहने को। हाफिजा बुना गया था भूल जाने को, दिल को तराशा की करे हाय हाय, इरादे की फितरत रखी दगा देने की, और क्या बचा है अब कहने को।
बहुत शुक्रिया। कुछ लम्हे लगेंगे इन कविताओं के असर से निकलने में और दूसरे सेशन की ओर बढ़ने में। हमारा 5th सेशन जो है उसका टाइटल है द वर्टिगो ऑफ लिविंग, अ कंपास और अ केज। द पोएट इज के Eltinae, who is from Sudan. Eltinae is a diaspora poet of Sudanese, Nubian and Mediterranean descent, whose work is centered around otherness, cultural, geographic displacement, generational trauma and exile. His debut collection, The Moral Judgment of Butterflies, won the Veber Prize for International Literature in 2019. He is a world literature lecturer and a part-time soul, funk, Afrobeat DJ residing in Granada, Spain. He has received the Visionary Arts Memorial Raza Poetry Prize in 2021. For Dignity Not Detention Prize, Poetry International, he was a co-winner in 2019. Again, we will be having a recording of his poetry because he was unable to come, unfortunately. और इनकी कविताओं का हिंदी में अनुवाद किया है अंबर पांडे जी ने। अंबर पांडे उपन्यासकार और कवि हैं। उनके 3 कविता संग्रह कोलाहल की कविताएं रजा पुस्तकमाला के अंतर्गत, गरुड़ और अन्य शोक गीत, रुक्मणी हरण और अन्य कविताएं, उपन्यासों की हिंदू त्रयी का भाग प्रथम, मतलब हिंदू, उनकी चर्चित कृतियां हैं। वे अंग्रेजी, फ्रांसीसी और जर्मन भाषा से हिंदी में अनुवाद करते हैं। अच्छा, अंबर भी नहीं आ पा रहे हैं, तो विभाग वैभव जी से मेरा आग्रह है कि वो यहाँ मंच पर आए।
Here in Granada, Spain. I'm very sorry that I could not make it to the SANSAAR Festival in New Delhi, hosted by the Raza Foundation. I would have loved to be there. Unfortunately, it was quite a traumatic and difficult experience at the BLS office in Madrid. This book is my first book, and I will be reading from. It's called The Moral Judgment of Butterflies. It came out in 2022. I wrote this book after 10 years of being stateless and losing my passport during Omar al-Bashir's regime in Sudan. I'm going to be reading 4 poems from my debut collection, The Moral Judgment of Butterflies, and I will begin with a poem called Watermelon. Something happens when you lose all your family to a word, when you finally choose sky over light, cloud over howling and slow disappearance. She calls herself sister, though she's more like a radicalized cousin who disappeared on a bus and only hears herself now. A colorblind brother lurks, says he won't fire unless he smells blood, life, or sorrow. So where do I hide them? First try your father who raised you Arab and free. Free of what, you ask? Comb your hair always, leave the house with your afro. People will remember that. A mother's confession singes. I should have let you go. Waited for that heartbeat to drown instead of birthing you, only to hang like a teardrop from both of my eyes. One of my teeth won't sleep. Look, he says, there's a brown streak and a blue one. I've never seen anything like it. I think of both Niles, of the person I drowned there. The next poem I'm going to be reading is called Breathing Exercises. It's a full moon, so I rise to the occasion. End up at a bar called Estrella, if that makes any sense. You're there pouting in your black dress. It's been a few months. You say, I abandoned you. Abandoned is what fanatics did to the faith I was raised in when they tore up the sky and left the city a rumble from a word like surrender. But you're okay. You're doing yoga now. Your body country I fled to rested like an anchor and quaked being a choice. I'm a goddess, you say, I need a god, and all I can think of are my parents. Those inshallah futures I cannot share with them because we're not the same people. I can't remember the word in Turkish for forget, only remember.
But nobody mourned. Hatırlamak how your whole body went ripe that time you heard someone say, go home, because you knew you needed a new address every time you landed. Forgetting in Arabic is human, a collective act of omission that sinks. Ensa. In Greek, lismono, forget, is a pigeonhole we crawl into to escape the vertigo of living. Ensa, that accent that rises like a pyramid in your throat every time they mention home. Lismono, those who claim studying and living somewhere are not the same thing. Hatırlamak, you belong anywhere you can flee to and return from in one piece. Hatırlamak, your language will follow you even into the bed of a stranger with no tongue. Ensa, the way some scents invade and bomb your insides like a gas that puts you under. Lismono, your nest, sometimes. Hatırlamak, we are born borderless until we touch. The next poem I'm going to be reading is called Wasiya, and I will end with Nafsi. Wasiya. How long is a life avoiding the beach? Believing God spoke through my father, some found seashell pushed off a shelf I cannot bury. I'd like to think that there are aisles of men praying somewhere once I'm gone, that their tongues wrap around where I kept warm like a turban, woven in prayer by strangers, that I am not found, stiff, half hanging off of a hotel bed under a phrase book in another useless language. I hope I go dreaming in Arabic, because love there sounds like the wind passes through every vowel. Somewhere buried in my voice, there is asphalt singing as brothers build rooms for one another. I find new corners in case I come back. Everyone gets a dua to float across the lake and watch disappear. This is mine. The poem that I will end with is called Nafsi, and is actually will be printed as part of a special edition coming out of the Index Press, issue 22, and it will be available as a print for those of you who may like to acquire a copy of it. Nafsi. You mustn't beg for love. Wave it down for the rush it gives or the places you discover together. Don't look for neighbors in your silence, for that noise that distracts from the breathing of your own life, though it's sleepless as a nightingale. You shouldn't yearn for 8 arms and longer breath underwater, for small silver smiles that expire tomorrow. Never bow your head to loveless duties, those mirages you were taught to chase alone, while others walked their path. You mustn't pine for a love you can nurse like a wound, trace back the life in its scars, confide in, and still look after in your mind. You mustn't mine for love, petrol or diamonds. Tend to the wealth and splendor in your laughter. Be selfish with your love. Stock, simmer, Seal it in jars for winter all year long. Keep your love. Be thankful of its scent on walls and sheets in pantries. Lather in your love at home before you decide someone else is more deserving. Whisper nefsi as you hang laundry. Feel that love spread from your shoulders. Thank you.
निर्वासन एक्साइल निर्वासन एक्साइल। आज मैं एक कमीज इस्त्री करूंगा और जा पड़ूंगा आंधी के आगे। काली कैब हूं यूं नगर नापता, हिंदुस्तानियों अफ्रीकियों और अरबों को सुनूंगा जो मेरे रंग, मेरे बाल, मेरी आंखों पर अपना दावा जतलाते हैं। शराब, मुस्कुराहटों और रात भर के संबंधों के लिए ठहरूंगा। गिनता हाथों में मेरे हाथों से भी कोमल हाथ थामे लोग। कल फोन बूथ खोजूंगा और घर बात करूंगा। भटकने की हानियों के बारे में सुनता दिखलाऊंगा मैंने उन्हें अभी झेला कहाँ है। झूठ कहूंगा कि आखिरकार अब खुश हूं। सुनने की प्रतीक्षा करूंगा कि मैं जहां भी जाऊंगा वहां दीवारों के कान होंगे और कि उनसे कभी भी आजाद नहीं हो पाऊंगा मैं। और कितनी देर, वे तो अब भी दिन, महीने, वर्ष गिनते हैं। मैं उन दीवारों और उनके कानों के बारे में सोचता, रोज नापता कि नहाकर बाहर आने में, बांधने में, फीते चेहरे बनाने में कितना समय लगता है, जब तक मुझे वे लौटा नहीं दिया जाता जहां से भागा तो पर जिससे कभी भाग नहीं पाया। मूल निवासी, नेटिव। वे सारे अधिकार जिनके बारे में मुझे सिखाया गया हवाई अड्डों पर कभी लागू नहीं होते। मुझे एक कमरे में ले जाया जाता है जहां घर से लाई जाने वाली हर चीज उनके हाथों में होती। वे हर चीज छूते तो हैं लेकिन यह भूल जाते हैं कि कहां से आए थे सोना और कपास। डिब्बों में घुसता, उंगलियों के निशान छोड़ता, इससे पहले कि तुम्हें वे पंख दिखाऊं जिनके बारे में तुम्हें कभी भी बताया नहीं गया। बस ना सेटल। सोचता हूँ अपने आप से क्या कहते होंगे वे। धूल जम जाती होगी जब दरीचों के नीचे, उस भूमि में वहाँ लौंग, पुदीना और दालचीनी से कलौं सी गंध और स्वाद आने लगता होगा। मैं इतना छोटा क्यों था कि कुछ भी याद न रख सका, सिवाय इसके कि मेरे माता पिता कार में फोन के बिल को लेकर झगड़ा कर रहे थे। इसलिए 30 साल बाद जब मुझे दूर जाने के लिए डांटा जाता, जब मुझ पर यह आरोप लगाया जाता है कि मैं भूल गया हूँ कि मैं कहाँ से आया हूँ, मैं अपने आप को याद दिलाता हूँ कि कैसे, कब और क्यों से सिर्फ कुछ डायल दूर रखा है एक चाकू। मैं अपने आप को याद दिलाता हूँ कि कैसे, कब और क्यों से सिर्फ कुछ डायल टोन दूर रखा है एक चाकू। मैं कैसे महसूस करता था उन उंगलियों को जो कुछ अवैध खोज रही थी, जिसे मैं हमेशा अपने हृदय में छुपा कर चलता था। मैं कैसे उन 14 व्याख्यानों में बैठा जो एक ऐसी भाषा में थे जिसे मैं मुश्किल से समझ पाता था, और फिर भी पहले से कहीं ज़्यादा लगता कि अपने घर पर हूँ। कैसे परदेश में महीने पहले हर रात के खाने के बाद उन फूलों वाली दोहर का उधेड़ता ऊनी बेग सिल देता था बहू, और कैसे कस्टम के अधिकारी ने उसे एक स्टील की मेज पर खोला, फिर धीरे धीरे उधेड़ दिया। ढूंढता था वह कुछ ऐसा जो अचानक ही हो जाए दिव्य। क्यों प्रेम में पूछे गए सभी उत्तर के प्रश्न बसते हैं तस्वीरों में? क्यों प्रेम में पूछे गए सभी प्रश्नों के उत्तर बचते हैं तस्वीरों में? क्यों इतने यात्रियों का हाईजैक करने वाली आवाज़ कभी उतर नहीं पाती भूमि पर नीरव? किस्मत। वह मेरा पिता हो सकता था, घनश्याम वर्ण वाला, उस भाषा में रास्ता पूछता जिस भाषा ने हमें ही नष्ट कर दिया नक्शे से। वह मेरा पिता हो सकता था, सफारी सूट में उंगलियों में चांदी की अंगूठियां चबा चबा कर बोलता कि उसका सुन न सके कोई गीत। रेत उगलता यूं खास्ता जवाब देता हूँ, मैं कपोत और चीते का पुत्र, उनके रक्त और पंखों से मैंने सीखा प्रेम। वह मेरा पिता हो सकता था, मगर ईश्वर की बात करते हुए वह मुस्कुरा दिया था। सुरमे का मोल। क्या इसे अभी सरल राग कहा जा सकता है? जब घिरती रात तक भागते अपने पैरों उड़ती धूल के नीचे डेरा डालते हो तुम, आधे सपने में सोचते कि जिब्रा हो, क्योंकि तुम्हारी गर्मियों का सब किसी जगह नहीं जमता। अपरिचितों के चेहरे पर जब तुम खांसते या बात करते हो रास्ते की, और उन मानचित्रों को कौन बचाएगा? झूठ छीन ले गया जिसे सच के हाथों, कौन हमारी आंखों खींचेगा सुरमे की रेख? बौराना। गाछों से शुरू हुआ, उन पर खुदी कितनी बातों से। जगह के लिए जो जीती और लड़ती रही, उस कब्र में जिसे कहते हैं हम दिल। रो रो कर सफेद पड़ जाता हूँ और नीला खुद से पूछता हूँ, क्या मैं यहाँ बस जीवन को देने आया था जन्म? इससे पहले कि मैं किसी जगह बूढ़ा होने को तैयार हूँ, हवा छितरा देती है मेरे आंसू। खेतों में जिन्न सी हंसती है जब ये बौराते हैं। जलांक। वाटरमार्क। कुछ घटता और पूरा परिवार एक शब्द में खो जाता है। जब तुम प्रकाश छोड़ चुनते हो आकाश, धीमे से अदृश्य होने और चित्कार नहीं चुनते हो मेघ। वह खुद को बहन कहती, पर असल में दिन प्रतिदिन कट्टर होती चचेरी बहन है। कभी बस में खो गई थी और अब सिर्फ अपनी ही आवाज सुनती है। वर्णांध भाई वह इधर उधर डोलता, कहता गोली नहीं चलाएगा। अब तक रक्त या जीवन या दुख न गंधाए, मैं इन्हें कहाँ छुपाऊं? पिता के पास सबसे पहले उन्होंने मुझे बनाया, अरब और आजाद किससे मैं पूछता हूँ। वे कहते हैं बाल संवारो, घर से निकलते और अफरो रखो, लोग याद रखेंगे। माँ कहती है मुझे तुम्हें जाने देना चाहिए था, उस हृदयगत की प्रतीक्षा करती रही जो डूब जाती जन्म लेने के बजाय, और तुम मेरी आंखों में अटका आंसू बनकर न रह जाते। मेरे दांतों में से एक बस वही अकेला कभी गुजराता नहीं। देखो, वह कहता है, इसमें भूरी एक रेखा है और नीली एक, ऐसा पहले कभी नहीं देखा। मैं उसकी दोनों नील नदियों के बारे में सोचता हूँ, उस मानुष की जिसे मैंने डुबोया था कहीं। बालकनी। मैं चाहता हूँ कि हमारे बीच सच को थामे रखूं, मगर हमारी स्मृतियों में प्रेम के लिए कोई मुद्रा नहीं है। उन्होंने मुझसे कहा था कि उस घर का वर्णन करूं जहां मैं बड़ा हुआ, मगर मुझे कुछ याद नहीं, केवल सीढ़ियां याद हैं। शरीर बारदानों की तरह ढहे हुए मेरे तलवों के नीचे कसमसाते। मैं गिनता हूँ अंग्रेजी में, अरबी में, यूनानी में, जब तक मैं फिर से उसी बालकनी पर टहलता नहीं पहुँच जाता जहाँ मैं अपने पिता का हाथ पकड़े खड़ा हूँ, जब वे मुझे दुनिया पहली और अंतिम बार दिखा रहे हैं। दृश्य भुला दो, निकट रहो, वे कहते हैं। उस मौन में बनाता हूँ मैं एक निशानी, सुरंगे खोदता हूँ जब तक सब पीछे नहीं छूट जाता। माँ कहती है कि प्रेम निगल जाता है, ऐसे बचाता है हमें। माँ कहती है प्रेम निगल जाता है, ऐसे बचाता है हमें। और इस तरह एक एक करके हम गायब होते चले गए। अपने बीच बचाए रखना चाहता हूँ सच, और भागे बिना प्रेम में जीवित रहना चाहता हूँ। तिरहल। तिरहल अरबी में यात्रा को कहते हैं, और अरब का यात्रा कारोबार है, जैसे अपने यहाँ ओला और वो का काम करते हैं ना, सबसे बड़ा जो कंपनी है उसका नाम तिरहल है। एक समय था जब सरहद और मुहरें न तय करती थी कि हम कहाँ से आएंगे। हमने जन्मों और उलाहनाओं का स्वागत चाय पीकर किया, छोड़ जाने का हिसाब कहानियों से लगाया, और उस धूल से जो हर जगह हमारे साथ चलती थी। आवाजें उठी और लोग भूकंप की तरफ बिखर गए। इससे पहले स्त्रियों और पुरुषों के मन से प्रार्थना रोटी और पानी की तरह ओझल हो जाती। एक सुबह एक मुसाफिर चला, पीछे 2 पद चिन्ह छोड़ गया। एक उस ओर था जहां वह जा रहा था, दूसरा घर की तरफ, घर की याद दिलाता हुआ। सब कुछ हमेशा के लिए बदल जाने से पहले कितना कुछ घटता है जन्म के प्रथम क्रंदन से पूर्व, जब नया जीवन आगे आता है। नाल काट दी जाती है, पहले पहल पग रखने से भी पहले, मृत और जीवित रिश्तेदारों से तुलनाएं किए जाने से भी पहले हमारा भविष्य के अनुसार बदल जाता है भाग्य। हमने जन्म भी इसीलिए लिया, यात्रा करते हुए सत्य का पीछा करते रहे। फ्रीडम, मुक्ति। यह कविता शुरू होती है जैसे गोली चलती है। यह कविता शुरू होती है जैसे गोली चलती है, जैसे 118 जीवन खो गए। शांतिपूर्ण विरोध करते हुए 3 जून 2019 को, और दुनिया ने पलक न झपकाई। तुम्हारी भाषा में मैं कैसे माफी मांगू? माफी तुम्हारे नुकसान के लिए नहीं, बल्कि इसलिए कि हम एक ही धरती पर रहे, एक ही हवा में सांस ली हमने। माफी कि हमारे शरीर आज नदियों में घसीटे जा रहे हैं और कल किसी गिनती में न होंगे। मेरा मन दौड़ता है, मेरा मन दौड़ता है किसी कहवा घर की किसी शराब खाने में या शहर के किसी मॉल में। स्वयं से कितनी दूर गए तुम कभी किसी अपरिचित के लिए। स्वयं से कितनी दूर गए तुम कभी किसी अपरिचित के लिए। कैसे कहूँ इंटरनेट बंद, इस तरह की तुम इसकी कल्पना कर सको। लोग गायब हो रहे हैं अभी जब तुम खाना खा रहे हो। जीवन है से था हो रहा है, उससे भी तेज जितनी तेजी से दौड़ कर जाते हो तुम जिम। कहाँ है तुम्हारी शांति भाई, और क्या मेरी शांति मुझे जल्दी नहीं मिल सकती। हम सब एक जैसी चीजें चाहते हैं, भले हम सब एक जैसे दिखते ना हो।
The sixth session is a discussion session, and the topic of discussion is poetry and the world today. The participating poets, I would like to invite them to the stage. We'll just reset the stage for the poets. Poetry and the world today. I invite Daniel Lippera, Ausra Kaziliunaite, Glorjana Veber, Katrina Karitko, and Samira Negrush to kindly come onto the stage and take their seats. Please, welcome. The moderator for this session is Ashok Vajpeyi. He's a poet, fiction writer, and life trustee of the Raza Foundation. Ashok.
Friends, so this is poetry and the world, and I think we have heard a few of these, all of them, at least one single poem. I'll start by telling you a line of a story of children that I read, because I have a granddaughter and I go on telling her stories, and because I don't know a lot of traditional stories, because I too am the victim of the forgetfulness that the modern age is. There is a beautiful line in that book, and the boy is asked by a mole, a little boy is asked by the mole, that what do you want to become when you grow? And the reply is kind. I want to become kind. And when I read it, I was really shocked. I said, can there be so beautiful reply? And this is exactly what poetry does. That it wants you to grow into becoming kind. You see, the experience of the poetry in our tradition, the pleasure of the poetry in this tradition is called the Raza Swada. The idea is of a ras. I'm sure you might not be knowing it because the world is Eurocentric, not Indic-centric. So the idea is that when you experience ras, at the time of the experience of the ras, that moment, the reader start experiencing her emotion as emotions themselves, which means that you do not experience your emotion as your emotion, but as the emotions themselves, which are present in each one. And a very great medieval Indian poet called Kabir, and it's amazing that a lot of people till now didn't even know that he was a Muslim. Kabir said in one of his poems, and he said, "Hum hai sab mein, I am in everyone. Sab hai, everyone is in me, and I am severally alone." So at the time of experience of poetry, you start experiencing everyone in you, the world in you, and you in the entire world. So in a sense, we understood the experience of Ras as the presence of the entire cosmos in you. So the poetry mediates and makes it possible for human beings to experience the entire existence as singularly her own. So there are multiple universes in this way which are born. And therefore, from very early in the tradition, we have understood that poetry negotiates between the singularity, which is very personal, and the singularity, which is universal. That you see the world as you see it, which means that you have also contributed into making of that world that you are looking at. There is another very beautiful understanding of the experience of the poetry in a very great thinker, Sanskrit. And he said, at the time of experience of rasa, experience of poetry, something called sadhya parinivritti takes place, that immediate absence of the loss of the other, which means that immediate loss of your individual ego, which means sudden death. So when you are reading poem, at least for that moment, for those few seconds, you experience your disappearance, because the other can disappear only when you disappear. And that leads you to once again experience the singularity of the world. And not lastly, before asking my wonderful poet friends to speak, poetry is also called Kanta Samyak Vakya, which means a sentence. Poem is a sentence which has been spoken by the feminine in you, which is always uncertain. Every one of us carry feminine in us, and therefore I think in Greek tradition you have these 5 genders, that male, female, neuter, and female, male, and female. You can make this a scale infinite. So it's a sentence spoken by the feminine in us, which is always ambiguous, which is never certain. And it is so because so that you participate into creating of that sentence. And a Kannada contemporary who's called Kiram Nagaraj used to say, all poets write half poems. And you have to contribute by the other half. So first I'll invite, we have writers from Argentina, Lithuania, Ukraine and Algeria, and Slovenia. I think. So first I'll invite the poet who read yesterday, most wonderful poet from Ukraine, Katerina, and I'll ask, because I've read her statement here, I'll want that she speaks something other than what has already been written, because this is given to people.
Okay. Should I go there?
Well, whatever.
You can come here.
Hello everybody, and I'm of poetry, and thank you for these beautiful and deep thoughts you shared with us. I agree with almost everything, and this touching remark about the feminine soul of the poetry, this anima, which is called from in Greek tradition. I would share some Ukrainian thoughts and angles of looking on poetry, and I will start with the question how difficult it is to be a poet today, because the world becomes more and more insane and cruel each and every day. So the poetry seems somehow to be helpless and even unnecessary to some people, because what should we do? We should produce weapons, we should conduct wars for our existence. So what can we do with the wars only? But in Ukraine, poetry has always been born in crisis. And you know, we are a kind of very poetry-centrical, logocentrical nation. We even have our big, great poets on our money, on our banknotes. Not politicians, not even military leaders, but our main poets and thinkers. And you often seek big answers for our big questions from our big writers, from tradition and from the contemporary ones. So the more difficult in Ukrainian tradition is not new. But today we are experiencing the crisis, which is global and continuous. And earlier, particularly in Ukraine, censorship always had its face. And contemporary Ukrainian struggle, you know, in its core is, first of all, anti-colonial, because colonialism has many faces. And there is the very particular spice of colonialism, where so-called white people colonize white people and Christian people colonize Christian people. That may sound strange, but this is Ukrainian experience, you know. So we are still continuing this anti-colonial struggle, and the Ukrainian poets I mentioned often been oppressed, executed, exiled, because they were like the faces of this struggle. And now this political censorship is often replaced by digital noise, algorithm, speed of life, and the inflation of language itself. And the moral function of poetry is endangered not because it's forbidden formally, but because it's being made to seem unnecessary, which I mentioned. And today, a poet, and a Ukrainian poet in particular, struggles not only with power, with oppression, but with the collapse of attention also. I can connect myself with the motto of the festival very deeply. Poetry is home and language is country. In Ukraine, in the period of colonization, of the statelessness, the language itself was the territory where we kept our identity. It was the replacement of the country, of the state existence. And now, in the world, when borders close, language becomes the last territory of freedom, somehow. For me, poetry is not kind of escapism from the world, but the act of preserving inner serenity and the way of struggling this deliberalization of the world, let's say so. For the exile, poetry is not a metaphor of home. It's the real space where somebody's name is not forbidden. And any state can deprive you of a passport, but it can deprive you of the sense of the rhythm of your language and of your poetry. For me, the kind of poetry I create is not another world, but a world where dignity is possible and valued. I would like to ask you not to think about Ukraine, about the of the land of constant pain, but like a land of free men who are struggling. And my poetry does not construct utopia. It restores the scale of human being. I try to be the poet speaking like this, in this way. And in the space, in the world, where pain is neither diminished, not turned into statistic, I stay with my writing. As I've previously said, poetry can't compete with violence and loudness, but it responds not with shouting, but with precision. When human body is humiliated, language becomes a way to restore it to human again. And also Ukrainian experience of destroying the language landscape itself, which is also political, but now language is often flattered to propaganda, slogans, and advertising. And in this world, poetry restores complexity, which I value really much. As long as the human being is capable of saying no to simplification, poetry will be alive. And we are witnessing not only political aggression in the world, but the narrowing of imagination in a way. It's strange because we can see more through internet, we can learn more through internet, but it makes us feel comfortable in our small bubbles, not moving anyway. And when societies politically become less open, then complexity is treated like a threat. Again, poetry is about complexity. Poetry resists this contraction. It keeps ambiguity alive. It defends the right of nuance in time which demands slogans. Any dictatorship of any kind always simplifies, and poetry complicates, and in doing so protects freedom. And I will end my speech with some more Ukrainian highlights. As I previously said, for us poetry has never been decorative, it has been existential. When political institutions, the state itself, were weak or destroyed, poetry carried memory and identity. Ukrainian poets, often imprisoned, exiled or killed. Even now, I have a lot of my fellow poets, writers, killed in this very war Russia is conducting in Ukraine. But yet, poetry remains central to public life and to the main national narrative. We have immensely full halls on poetry reading, very empathetic audience, often coming to the halls with no heating, no lighting, after the nights under the Russian missiles. So, but anytime any poet is reading, he gathers huge audience, which is like supporting his voice and the voice of the community. Because during the war, poems circulate faster than official speeches, in a way. And poetry becomes a form of weakness. But I don't want it to be the only, this to be the only way of speaking, because poetry is also about vulnerability, of deep sense of humanity, and still being capable to speak about love, to love through all the atrocities war brings, is the most meaningful way of writing, of speaking, and of coexistence. But poetry is a form of solidarity. And for Ukrainians, it's not an religion, but a civic practice. Not a luxury of peace, but a structure of survival and existence. Thank you so much.
And now I invite Daniel Lupara. He's from Argentina, and Argentina is a country, for me at least, of Antonio Borges. I don't know how is Borges properly pronounced. And third, Roberto Juarez. These three masters of, like Juarez, Borges once said, everything is endless. That which stops breaks. And of course, poetry restores that break. And Roberto Juarez, the most beautiful line, he said, death is another way of looking. So he comes from that land, and I wanted to come to Argentina, which means that I didn't want him to come here, but I wanted me to go there, in '84, when Borges was alive. And I just wanted to see him. Then I went to Switzerland once, and I went to that exact place where, beside the Rhone, yes, Borges and his wife, Maria Cadoma, they stood, and there was a photograph of theirs. And now they have this Mont Blanc there advertising the pen. So I invite Daniel Lupara.
Thank you so much. You have a home there if you want to go.
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, how are you? Thank you so much. That was beautiful and very moving. I took the liberty of bringing these notes because my English is not fluent enough to speak about something so delicate and crucial. As I write this on the plane, I remember the words of the Palestinian-American poet Fadi Judah, who says something wonderful that I would like to share with you. He says that the responsibility of the poet is to strive to become the memory people may one day hold of what it means to be human, a never-changing constant. All that remains of all poetry is the music of what it means to be human. And perhaps that's all we want from poetry, he says, a language of life. Or at least that's what I love from poetry, I think. Much of the poetry I love has for millennia aspired to create languages that enroll the boundary we have culturally built between the more than human world and ourselves. It creates styles that unsettle our perception of self and other. The memory of what it means to be human is a memory of language. It is a grammar, where the forces that oppress and suppress life seeks generalization, which breeds indifference. Poetry can draw us out of indifference by connecting us to the singularity of life. At the same time, this language proposes bonds that undo the convenient, inward-looking individualism in which we are encouraged to sink, where value lies in the self, rather than in bonds of inheritance, dependence, and cooperation, in the voices that speak within ours, and in how our voices will speak in others in the future. I once read an historian who claims that if we take 100 random years from the last 5,000, in 94 of those years there has been war somewhere in the world, often in more than one place. Once I opened the Iliad by Homer, you know, the Greek poem, and the comrade-in-chief of the Greek army said to his brother who was about to kill someone, "Why do you show such pity to this man? Let none escape death, none even the baby in the mother's womb. Let them all be destroyed in Troy, without burial and without memory." 3,000 years later, I hear someone on TV says, "We must raise Gaza, kill them all, spare no one. The woman is the enemy, the baby is an enemy, the pregnant woman is an enemy." 3,000 years later, a reservist from Israel urges the troops, prevail, annihilate them, leave none alive, erase their memory, erase them, their families, mothers, and children. We will go in and destroy everything before us. Destroy their houses, and then the houses that follow, with our force, total destruction. Poetry, it's a complex mirror. I write poetry from a place of profound not knowing about what I am doing. Writing where it does not feel entirely safe, where I am not sure it is entirely poetry, or where things are unclear. What is written is completed where another reads it and expands its meaning. When it becomes memory for others, the music of what it means to be human. Poets have been persecuted, exiled, tortured, massacred, like many, many other human beings. But there are moments, like this one I believe, when the way poetry can dismantle the scaffolding of the status quo so that as subjectivity becomes radical and urgent. You know, there is a Peruvian poet that I love, Jose Watanabe, and he wrote this: "Oh, to tend what is fleeting under the sun, the eyes begin to melt beneath my shadow, as desperate as it was futile, as it dissolved it through slender primordial beings, that for only an instant held the firmness of quartz crystal and then became pure forms like a mountain or a planet being laid waste. One cannot love what flees so quickly. Love quickly, the sun told me. I think of this poem by José Watanabe as an attempt, like so much poetry, to love and celebrate something before it disappears or is destroyed, to hold together lament and reverence, claim and tearing open. Poetry is a language for trembling. It leaves us exposed, skin bare, to atrocity and to beauty. And in this way, it sometimes become a sensitive support, not so much for interpreting reality, for that philosophy, sociology, anthropology, and other humanities may be sharper, but for inhabiting it. Poetry is a collective inheritance of words, a music that returns trembling to us. That is to say, empathy, a thawing of our sensibility. I confess that when I write, I am not thinking in terms of morality, no, but of curiosity. And curiosity, too, is an ethic. In that sense, any poem is an exercise of attention at a time when our attention is commodified and monetized second by second. More than saying, a poem does. More than telling us about something, a poem is something. Poetry turns attention into an event. It can not only denounce, but shakes at the root the vital numbness to which we are being subjected, and thus reconnect us, as Judah says, with the language of life, the music of what it means to be human. In times of exile, poetry extends its channels of connection. In times of massacre and torture, it de-automatizes death. In times of statics, it senioralizes life. In times of fake news and post-truth, it offers us an ethic of attention and the music of life. Thank you.
Before we go to the next poet, Ausra, I wanted to say this about what Katerina, the Ukrainian poet, said about the condition in Ukraine. And I'll remind you, I don't know whether you read that article or not, there's a very great Ukrainian poet, I'm just forgetting her name. She wrote a piece on Dostoevsky and those great Russian writers, reading whom we grew up. And she so brilliantly analyzes and, in a sense, questions them, that I immediately thought that you can also see Dostoevsky from a completely different Ukrainian angle. And I actually got that book. I just can't remember. This is some very great writer with a red cover, but I can't remember the name. Secondly, Milan Kundera also said, because this concerns my country too, that Russia was always, even after it became a communist state, was always inflicted by that Russian nationalism. Now we are seeing Russian nationalism in its most brutal form, its most monstrous form. And it doesn't stop there. And it is a sad thing for the communists of our traditions, our culture, that they just couldn't see the horror that the nationalism brings with it. And two great personalities of Indian 20th Indian century. One was Mahatma Gandhi, and another was Rabindranath Tagore. They went all the way to speak against the nationalism. And this is something, because poets formally, poets existentially are citizens of the earth. They are not citizens of, primarily not citizens of their nations. Nations come much later. And Daniel said about the singularity in attention. And that's what Ausra also said in her little piece. My teacher, my Ustad, Manipal, a great filmmaker, used to say that all great works of art create a deep and a new quality of attention. Poetry doesn't communicate, it evokes that attention. It doesn't change, it doesn't inform you about certain things. It changes the world that you look around you. And therefore, haiku are, to my mind, the greatest writings, poetry. Just a simple, an ancient pond, frog jumps, splash. And the world around you changes. Now I invite Ausra from Lithuania, and I've read a book about Lithuania which in a sense suggests that there were a lot of links between our tradition and the Lithuanian also. Ausra.
Hello. I'm happy to be here, and actually I really enjoyed all things that my colleagues already told. You know, as a poet, I always attempt to celebrate the language, but as a philosopher, usually I kind of complicate things. So, for example, when we're speaking about Lithuanian language, it's a fact, but it's a miracle, but Lithuanian language is still spoken. It's one of the oldest languages and one of the closest languages to Proto-Indo-European language. So it's very, very archaic language, and all scholars who study Lithuanian language at universities, when they want to know what's happened with Indo-European languages and Indo-European languages families and things like that, they usually have a lot of many theories what happened to Lithuanians, that the language haven't evolved. We are archaic, we are not modern in our language sense, we have in old Lithuanian, many words to call animals and agriculture stuff, and all philosophical terms and words we usually borrowing from, let me say, Germany, German language or languages like that. And even to create some new words in Lithuanian, it's not so easy like in German language. In German, you can just put one word plus another, and you have words from Nietzsche, Übermensch, or something like that. In Lithuanian, no. When we speak, in each sentence, we changing words. And Lithuanian language shares a lot of in common with Sanskrit language. We even have same words with same meanings. And a lot of scholars still don't know why, what happened. But we have a lot of stories, a lot of theories. And another reason why I call this thing that Lithuanian language is still spoken, and still spoken in very, very archaic form, is that Lithuania and Lithuanians deals with a lot of colonialism around. Our country is placed in Europe between this east and west part of Europe. So it means that, maybe we would like to stay calm and don't think about enemies or about aggression, but like all times we've been between two big parts, but always was in a battle somehow. Another quite interesting thing, maybe not a lot of our audience knows it, but Lithuanians was the last baptized nation in Europe. And it happened in 15th century. So, and it was a bit like some kind of diplomacy act, because Grand Dukes of Grand Duchy of Lithuania, they were we call it old believers, but you can call it in English also pagans. And it was like animistic religion. And our old dukes, they were very, very good diplomats. So they were fighting crusaders and Christians for many, many years. And after they decided, but okay, it comes time, but maybe we are not so strong enough, so let's act what we baptized. It was all noblemen, they just let Pope to baptize them. But all the religion practices was still practiced for a long time, and some scholars found the evidence that even in the beginning of 20th century, it still existed magic with snakes and things like that. And it's interesting because we became baptized very late, but now in Lithuania Christianity is very rooted. And it's also an interesting thing, and I think strongly related with this thing that Lithuania was part of Soviet Union for 50 years. And a lot of people from far away, they think, oh, this small country Lithuania, they just invite with Soviet Union, and they wanted to become part of Soviet Union. But actually it's not that true. The thing is that many Lithuanians who was fighting it or tried to fight it, they were sent to Siberia, they were sent to work camps, they were building Trans-Siberia train rail, and they died. And a lot of writers and very good poets, they were killed, imprisoned, forced to emigrate. So we have a huge diaspora in the United States for that reason, because almost all of intellectuals left Lithuania, was killed, or was forced to collaborate. So, and we spent 50 years under occupation. And that time, because Soviet Union, it was forbidden to practice religion in Soviet Union, and Christianity became this rebellious force. So, Christianity became even more popular when Lithuania became independent in the 90s. And I think it's hardly rooted in this thing that a lot of intellectuals, they were thought that Christianity is related with Lithuanian identity itself. So it's also an interesting thing to think about. And during this 50 years, Lithuanians was still spoken Lithuanian language. And but in all universities and schools, for example, my parents as well, now they are in the 70 years old, so they speak Russian, but it was just for this official purposes. You was receiving documents in Russian language or things like that, but Lithuanian language always was spoken. And before, we also experienced this tense relationship with Russian Empire, because Tsars, they forbidden Lithuanian language in printed press. So we in Lithuania have this phenomena who no one in the world has. It's called knygnešiai. And knygnešiai was book smugglers. Like now, smugglers usually brought cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, and in Lithuania we have guys, like gangs, who was bringing books secretly, like mafia, because it's forbidden to do that. And our language has very long history. And in this 50 years under oppression, we still were able to print books during Soviet Union times in Lithuania, so it was different situation. But, it's also the way I would like to be in this particular case more philosopher than a poet, and to doubt a bit power of poetry a bit. Because many Lithuanian poets under occupation, they were forced to collaborate or they wanted to collaborate, so they wrote a lot of verses celebrating Stalin, and after when Stalin was not a cool guy anymore, like Lenin and all this party committee and things like that. Yeah, but it's still not easy to recognize and separate so easily good poetry from bad poetry if we want to use these two different terms. Because even poets who was collaborating and was worshipping sun and communism and also Moscow, they still wrote quite a good poetry. In a way, not about Lenin, maybe, but still. And it's another thing that in Lithuania we still have this quite strong poetry tradition of symbolism, because a lot of people who tried to escape this propaganda writing stuff, they was writing not directly about power, about things like political injustice and things like that, but for example, maybe I saw that on the street, one intellectual was beaten because he was speaking something freely. So I can write poetry about that, but instead of these things that happen, I'm talking about flower and rabbit, and how rabbit was so dangerous and had lunch and ate this flower. So we talk in symbols, and even nowadays in Lithuanian poetry we have this phenomenon. Okay, but another thing what I want just briefly mention that actually struck my mind was in the first session today we heard, I have the name here, the poet was unfortunately not here today, Labavidi. He mentioned that in genocide a lot of words and terms, they just change their meanings or they lack the previous meaning. So this transformation of words also happening. And for example, when I in Lithuania was writing from a philosophical point of view about reasons why we choose not to call genocide in Gaza genocide. Yeah, sorry, I'm calling it and I'm not afraid to do that. But many intellectuals in my country, but not just in my country, in many countries, they're trying to use a lot of this metaphorical way of speaking that in Lithuania we were using for years under Soviet Union occupation. But they're doing it not because someone forced them, but for some other reasons. And I think that one important reason why it's happening, it's because, languages are like animals, and we have cow, we have wolf, we have bird, and you know, all of them are very different, and all of them has different approaches to the world and what's happening. And all languages have different powers, what empowers them. And you know, the great power of language is that, you know, we as people who spoke languages are affected not just of things what was said, but things what was unspoken. And like, you know, French philosopher and thinker Michel Foucault once told, like, you know, these unspoken things creates the soul and the essence of language. And, you know, when I arrived in a new country, for me, I don't understand a lot of culture things, what's happening. But sometimes, you know, you can notice something was unspoken, even if you're not speaking that language. And, you know, a lot of things that it's not spoken couldn't be approached and even couldn't be criticized. And we can't even consider and think about it freely. And this is the problem. And like from philosophical point of view, from sociological point of view, from like this academia, we don't have tools how to change this silence. We just don't know how to do it. We can create more noise, more words, we can speak more. But the real tool, I think, and real key is in a poetry. Because poetry itself could somehow let us, maybe not to break the walls between what is spoken and what is not unspoken, but maybe when you are reading good poem, not like so-so poem, but like good poem. You know, many so-so poems are written, but good poem. And if you're in a right place in your mind, and if it's a time for you, you can create by reading that poetry, that poem, as Umberto Eco said, you know, some hole in the wall.
Yes.
And through this hole, you can see something, but it's impossible to notice. So I'm really happy to be here in the room with many great poets. And I hope that one of us, one day, will write 1 or 2 poems that would help someone to look, to see through the wall. Thank you.